There's a disturbing trend of gun violence across the country.
People, seemingly because of minor misunderstandings, end up shot, scarred, and in one case, dead. Authorities say 20-year-old Kaylin Gillis was shot and killed when her friend accidentally turned into the wrong driveway. The shooter, Kevin Monahan, is now in jail. Monahan's attorney claims he believed the cars were revving their engines and he felt threatened.
For this man to sit on his porch and fire at a car with no threat is just angers me so badly. And I just hope to God that he dies in jail.
In North Carolina, a man shot a father in the back and a bullet fragment scarred his 6-year-old daughter's cheek, reportedly when they were grabbing a basketball that rolled into the suspect's yard.
Why did you shoot my daddy and me? Tried to shoot a kid's dad.
84-year-old Andrew Lester is facing charges for felony assault and armed criminal action in Missouri. Police say he shot 16-year-old Ralph Yarl, who was trying to pick up his twin brothers. Yarl, who's black, rang Lester's doorbell by accident because he was at the wrong address. Lester, who's white, shot Yarl through the glass door without saying anything because, according to his attorney, he thought the teen was trying to break into his home. Yarl's family wants to see federal charges for a hate crime.
Despite the pretext that he believed that someone was touching the door, there's no justification for the use of force other than he observed a black boy on his porch. And if you targeted this young man because of his black skin, that is in fact a hate crime.
And a man in Texas opened fire on 2 cheerleaders when they accidentally tried getting into his car thinking it was their ride. Both ended up in the hospital but are expected to survive. Next on NightTeam, we talk to a prosecutor about self-defense laws in Indiana and, when race is involved, what makes it a hate crime. Matt, it seems in these incidents, folks acted as if someone who's just in their personal space or approaching their property, they feel that's enough to be justified to pull a trigger. Is that enough?
With respect to any form of self-defense, you're really looking at whether or not it's reasonable. And so there has to be this reasonable belief by you as an individual who decides to pull a trigger or use certain force. And obviously in this context, we're talking about deadly force. And that only gets somewhat muddy when we're talking about defense of your house. When you look at the statute, commonly called the Castle Doctrine, or some people call it stand your ground laws, it says that you can use force, including deadly force, but there has to be some level of reasonableness to it. The way the statutes are written, it's somewhat black and white, but the way it's actually applied in practice, it's never black and white. It's all fact specific. So what's a threat to you may not be a threat to me, but it's also where we live, right? So it's one of those things that, based on the facts, it's going to boil down to whether or not it was reasonable for me to do the actions I did. When we're talking about defense of person, you can't do that if you're going to be the initial aggressor. You can't do that if you're somebody who's sort of baiting somebody in so you can use deadly force or excessive force on that. And the burden's on the prosecutor to show that it just wasn't reasonable and it wasn't justified.
So it's not exactly clear cut. And in the case of the Kansas City teenager shot, some believe that race was a factor in the homeowner pulling the trigger. Now, even if there is racial prejudice or bias, is that alone enough to charge a hate crime?
Whether implicit bias goes to that is difficult because obviously inherent with anything that's an implicit bias is going to be an unintentionality. So you're really going to look at that individual person, the facts and circumstances behind them, and whether or not there is enough to show that even though it's somewhat implicit, there's a lot about them that shows they have that prejudice and bias against an individual in a protected class.
Matt Kubacki, thank you for joining us.
Yes, sir.